We want to get started here. My name is Linda Nemec Foster. I'm an alum of Aquinas College, and with my husband, Tony Foster, we founded the Contemporary Writer Series here at Aquinas, and we're so happy to welcome you for our 17th season. This is the final event, and what an event it is. We're really looking forward to hearing Luis later in just a few minutes. But first of all, some housekeeping. Please turn off all cell phones. And I just had to do that for mine a couple of minutes ago. Anything that beeps, bumps, plays a little song, please turn everything off. Thank you. And I just want to briefly tell you about next season. We will be having 4 authors, like we always do, starting with Gregory Orr, the fabulous poet Gregory Orr, on September 17th, and then John D'Agata, a wonderful creative nonfiction writer from Iowa, University of Iowa, on October 30th. We have novelist Peter Ho Davies in March, and a wonderful performance poet in April, but I can't tell you who because it's not confirmed yet, so stay tuned. Before we introduce the man of the hour, and Shelley Rothschafer from the faculty will be introducing Luis, I want to recognize the woman of the hour. And this is our 17th season, and for 15 years of our history, we've had a phenomenal director, Pam Lupke. She will still remain on our committee, but she is stepping down as director, and please join me in thanking her. Pam? Pam has not only been a remarkable director, but she's been such a confidant and such a dear, dear friend. And I'm glad that you're still going to be on our committee, but thank you for the wonderful, wonderful leadership you've provided for us. And I would not let my husband give another woman flowers except for you. So my husband just came in just in the nick of time. All right, from the woman of the hour to the man of the hour. And I am happy to introduce Shelley Rothschafer. She loves world languages. That is her forte, and she's an associate professor of Spanish here at Aquinas. Help me in welcoming Shelley.
Welcome. Bienvenidos. Hello, everyone. With pleasure, I'm here to introduce Mr. Luis Alberto Urrea to our Aquinas College community. Luis Urrea was born in Tijuana, Mexico, and moved as a child to San Diego, California. Urrea is from a bicultural and bilingual family. His father was a Mexican military official, and his American mother served in World War II as a donut dolly. Urrea went to undergraduate school at the University of San Diego. He continued his graduate studies at CU Boulder, and he earned an honorary doctorate from Loyola. He has worked as a relief worker in Tijuana, a columnist for newspaper and journal publications. He has written poetry, short stories, creative nonfiction, and novels. He has published 15 texts and earned several national and international awards. Soon to be published will be a new collection of poetry, a new edition of the award-winning The Devil's Highway, as well as a historical piece of fiction based on his mother. The first time I read Urrea was his collection of creative nonfiction, By the Lake of Sleeping Children, The Secret Life of the Mexican Border. And several of these pieces are out on the table outside, so if you want to get a look at them afterward, please do. In it, he speaks of immigration, poverty, the hope for a better life, and the human cost to achieve the dream. Many of us are children of immigrants, or our families immigrated here from another country. We all should be able to relate when he states, they're trying to bring the United States the best they have to offer. They come here to make their best efforts, to work hard, to better themselves, to enjoy a better world, to get educated and to prosper. It's the American dream writ large. The weak do not survive this midnight entry. Only the strong are inheriting this particular earth. The theme of human endurance and family ties is also reiterated in his novel Into the Beautiful North. Currently, one of my classes is reading the Spanish translation. The narrative is an epic. It spans from Sinaloa, Mexico to the Tijuana border. It continues as the characters take a road trip from California all the way to Kankakee, Illinois, in order to reunite lost family members. Into the Beautiful North reminds us that the only constant is change. And in order to improve ourselves, we have to be willing to embrace the journey that life gifts us. Please help me welcome Mr. Luis Alberto Urrea.
Buenas tardes, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Tijuana in the house. Yes, I look Irish. So now we've handled the first question. Yeah, my mom was American, my dad was Mexican, but my dad was the blonde, blue-eyed one. Actually, kind of a redhead. My dad looked a little bit like Errol Flynn, actually. So I'm going to explain some of this to you, and then talk about where I come from and why I write, and some of my border experiences, and then give you a little piece of my last book, which is Queen of America, and then talk with you. There's a mic there and a mic over here. So we can ask some questions at the end. I'm going to watch the clock so I don't go over, because I always go over. Oh, good. So here's a key to why I look Irish, okay? My grandmother from Rosario, Sinaloa, a little town south of Mazatlan, was named Guadalupe Murray. And Urrea is Basque. It's Basque. And in Basque, it basically means the golden men. Yeah, you know. It's a curse, but I live with it. So, or men of gold. And my grandfather, Juan, was Basque. And the Basque and the Irish lass created us. My mom was from New York, but the family was actually from Virginia. They came over, in Pilgrim days. And my dad's family came over in conquistador days. So they had a little bit of a cultural battle going on. My mother would be like, dear boy, we arrived in the colonies. And my father was like, I came in the 1500s. So my dad wins that one. But the Urrea family were three brothers who came during the conquest, and one went to Chile, and then two went to Mexico. Well, sort of Central America. One went to Guadalajara area and went, sort of roved around down to Costa Rica and back up. And then one settled in the Culiacan, Sinaloa area, which is where my family came from, that one branch. And he actually settled what became the city of Culiacan. It was an Indian village, of course, and they raided it and made it into a Spaniard outpost, a military outpost. And that's us. I was born down there. My mother, as you heard, was a donut dolly. I heard some gasps, so if people know about donut dollies, do talk to me afterwards, because I'm writing the ultimate epic about these women who have been ignored and forgotten by history, and it makes me kind of mad, If you know about the Band of Brothers, there was a Band of Sisters giving those guys coffee. And it's kind of weird to me that all the books about those battles of the Bulge books and the Siege of Bastogne and what they called the Highway to Hell, which was the road from France, to Belgium and so forth, doesn't include those women. Stephen Ambrose's books the women were right there, but he never mentions them, which makes me kind of sad because my mother landed on Omaha Beach. My mother drove a 2.5-ton GMC truck with a kitchen on the back and went through all those battle experiences and was in the Siege of Bastogne, in the Battle of the Bulge under George Patton. I like to say my mom fought the Battle of the Bulge with a donut in her hand instead of a gun. And they made coffee, and my mother accidentally liberated Buchenwald. The donut dollies were there. They were in Weimar, and I think it was 3 soldiers actually found Buchenwald at the top of the hill and came back down to report what they had found, and Patton went and told the women, you're going to go up there in the morning. And these women thought it was a POW camp, and one of the incredible, to me, touching details is these ladies who had been trained to provide succor and support and home and etiquette to the soldiers in battle. They even had record players so they could play records for these guys. Thought they were going to take lunch to downed pilots, and they made picnic baskets with sandwiches. And they traipsed up to Buchenwald with picnics. And my mother used to tell me the first thing she saw was a bulldozer moving white logs across the ground until she realized they weren't logs. And all hell broke loose from there. She'd already been in this unbelievable siege in Bastogne, which was mind-boggling. If you saw Band of Brothers, there's a whole episode of the destruction of Bastogne. She was there. And then she was almost killed thereafter and was severely injured and came home. So it's quite a story. And I'm 600 pages in and trying to speed to the end now. And I'm really excited to be doing it. She left journals, photo albums, letters, and she saved all of the Red Cross newsletters, which are lost to history. So I have, they're called the Sinker, because that was the name of the donut, Sinkers. I've got them. I even have the menu cards from the troop ship. I can tell what she ate for breakfast on the way across the Atlantic. It's mind-boggling. So a lot of veterans have been sharing stories with me, and I'm using them in the books. I was enamored of story from the beginning. I grew up in this family. You can imagine, my mom, English and Hungarian. My family is whatever we were, Mexican melting pot, Irish, Basque, Mexican. This was an explosion of crazy talk in my family's house. We lived in my grandma's house in Tijuana. It was a little yellow house. My grandfather was a Freemason, and his Masonic brothers built this house with him. And it was the nexus of the Urrea family. We were all jammed in their little dirt street in Tijuana, and I was hearing these mad tales all the time about stuff. And I was really excited that I was coming here because, my family were lapsed Catholics. So it's cool to be in a Catholic school because I can talk about stuff that y'all will understand that some audiences don't. My grandmother didn't ever want to go to Mass. She didn't really like religion, but she wanted to be in good with God. So she researched stuff that she thought would be great with God. So once a week, she would cook dinner for the priest, the parish priest, the young priest. And in Mexico, they're not allowed to wear any stuff. They can't wear any kind of, collar or anything. They have to be secular. So he would come down sadly in his jeans and his black shoes, and she would cook him a great dinner, and he would eat, and Grandma was like, okay, God liked that, and he'd go back. And then she'd start doing other stuff. One of the things she would do is, I had these crazy cousins in this house. One of them was Hugo. Hugo, if you read any of my books, you will see him appear, especially in Into the Beautiful North. If anybody reads that book, there's a samurai warrior in it. That's my cousin Hugo. And Hugo talked like this all the time. Even when he was 8, he talked like this. He's muy bad. And he was so bad that when my poor grandmother passed away, he called me and he said, Luis, Grandma, she's dead. And he hung up. Now, Hugo was the first person in our family to grow a zapata mustache. And I always tell people he grew it at about 10. Right? He had like 2 whiskers. They would grease down. And he talked like this. And he saw samurai movies on PBS from San Diego and said, I'm going to be the first Mexican samurai. And he did. But he was sort of the family criminal, so he was up for any mischief. And our grandmother got this idea that, well, she didn't go to Mass, but she'd been raised in Mass, and she knew that they squirted holy water around during the Mass, so she would send us up to the church to steal holy water. Yeah, and she would give us like an empty aspirin bottle, Ugo and me, and we'd creep into the church, and he'd be bloop, 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 and I'd be standing guard. And then we'd go and take it to her, and she'd go around the house like, okay, all right, okay. So she felt like we were pretty blessed that way. And the other thing, she felt that since the priests burned incense during the old Mass, maybe she just didn't like Latin disappearing, I don't know. She would burn incense. She figured incense was a really great way to make God happy because you could see it and smell it. The house would be blue when you'd go over there with smoke because she was burning so much incense. But it didn't occur to her to put it in little plates. She would just stick the cones anywhere so you'd see little burn marks on the windowsills and stuff. And my dad had a piano there. It was all burned up. She'd burn incense. And she got this whacked out idea that if she did not collect the cones of ash at the end of the week, that would be even better because God could count them. So God could look down, say, on Friday and say, oh, she burned 37 cones of incense this week, and she'd get another check, right? Fed the priest, holy water, incense, nice. My aunt, who was what inspired me to be a writer in a lot of ways, we call Tia Flaca, Aunt Skinny. And Tia Flaca was the family storyteller. I mean, they were all storytellers. They had the Blarney and the Mexican thing going on. But she was interesting. My aunt, her sister, was Aunt Irma. And my Aunt Irma was Mexico's women's bowling champion. And she was terrifying. I always tell people she was the meanest person I ever met, including writing a book about the U.S. Border Patrol. All the Border Patrol agents, the meanest guys, not anywhere near my Aunt Irma. And Aunt Irma ruled the whole family with her terror. So Aunt Flaca was skinny and had to find other ways to control us, and she did it with stories, talking, right? Now, if you can picture this woman, I always like to tell people, because it brings her back to me, she's gone, but Aunt Flaca was, as advertised, skinny. She was a skinny aunt, lifelong diabetic, so she had gone blind in her left eye from diabetes, and it was a little squinchy, a little bit squinchy. And she was a little Asian looking. They sometimes said she was Chinese, but she wasn't, but so you can imagine that. And she had the cat eye glasses, remember those? Ooh, had glitter in them. Really styling, right? And she always smoked menthol cigs, so she had like a Newport sticking out of the left side. And there was always smoke going up this side of her, so it looked like smoke was coming out of the bad eye, And she would use her stories to control us. So if you, for example, she hated mess in the house because she hated doing housework. She worked in a tuna cannery all day. She would come home exhausted, and if we'd made a mess, she would just hit the roof. She couldn't stand it. So she would make up stories to keep us from doing things, travesuras they called them, misbehaviors. And so she didn't like mess. And I would go back and forth from San Diego once I'd left Tijuana at will, really, with my dad. Then I was visiting one day, and I was looking around, and I was seeing all these weird cones. These white, pale, gray, white cones everywhere. And I remember saying to her, Oye, tia, what is that? And she said, ¿Qué, mijo? What is what? I said, what are those cones everywhere? I didn't know what they were. Now, remember, she didn't want a mess in the house. So she says to me, oh, those cones are the souls of dead men. And I was like, what? Yeah, they're the souls of dead men. And if you knock them over, make a mess, the house will be full of ghosts. So, right? I didn't touch them. And she's the one who would tell me all these family stories. She was sort of the family historian. There's a scene in this book I mentioned, Into the Beautiful North, where the two sisters had a fight about Yul Brynner being the world's greatest Mexican movie star. Those are my aunts that had that fight. I listened to it, so it went into my book. Everything goes into the book. Be careful what you say around any creative writing majors that you have in this school, because whatever you've done will end up in a book somehow. But my Aunt Irma the bowler, thought Yul Brynner was Mexico's greatest movie actor. And she announced it. She used to call him Joel Brynner. Ay, Joel Briner. Que hombre, Joel Briner. He's the greatest Mexican movie star in the world. And my Aunt Flaca said, you're crazy. He's not Mexican. What kind of a name is Joel for a Mexican? No, hombre, I bowled all over the world. I've bowled in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. I saw his house. It proves he's Mexican. And she said, and I saw him play Pancho Villa, and he spoke a perfect Spanish. And Flaca was like, it was dubbed, you idiot. You know. Goes into the book. So how could you not want to write? I love to read. My mother, thank God, read to me every day. She read, Mark Twain and stuff to me. And so I had the bug. I love to listen to the stories. I love to hear everybody tell the stories. I love to read stories. I think it all came together for me as I grew up. I was the first person in my family to go to college, which was an incredible blessing and wonder to me. And I was lucky that a well-known author came, Ursula K. Le Guin. I don't know if anybody's a science fiction or fantasy pal, but she was my Aunt Ursula. She used to call herself Tu Tia Osa, your aunt the bear. And this will date me age-wise, but I got to take her to her first showing of Star Wars. And if you don't know Ursula, she's a little tiny woman. And back in those days, she smoked a pipe, which I thought was the coolest thing on earth. And she also drank, which I thought was cool because I hadn't really seen people drinking whiskey before. And you'd go to her apartment and she'd have a whiskey with 2 rocks and a pipe. I'd think, wow, she's like the female James Bond or something, And we went to Star Wars, and I still remember she sat sideways in her chair with her feet up and was leaning back against me, and she would tell me all the science errors in the movie. When Han Solo went into hyperspace, she said, that should be turning blue, don't you? I'd say, oh, really? And when they slowed down, she said, those stars need to turn red, And she took a story of mine and sold it and published it for her first anthology. And I talked with the students today about this a little bit. I know there are writers here, but I just want to say that people were asking me, the career, what's it like? And I want to tell you, once you taste it, it's just incredible because, like I said, we came from Tijuana. It was a dirt street with no plumbing and a lot of struggle, a lot of poverty. And I didn't think guys like me got to do books. I certainly didn't think we'd publish books or have stories out or fans or whatever. But when that anthology came out, if you remember pocket books, old timers like me, little paperbacks, $1.95, 75 cents, and they're really 45 cents when I was a kid. So the anthology came out. It was called Edges, and it was about $1.25, $1.75, something like that. And I used to hang out in a donut shop with my pals. So I had a bunch of musician friends. And one of the things that made me a writer was writing lyrics for these guys for their rock songs because they were too dumb to write them. And the book had come out. And my friend said, dude, your book's like at the bookstore, man. I said, is it really? They said, yeah, let's go get them. And I said, really? You're going to buy my book? They said, yeah, let's go. So 6 of us piled into a station wagon, and off we went to the bookstore, and there they were. Each guy had about $2, the book 75 each, and we all went to the checkout line. All of them lined up with my book, and one of them said, hey, you know what? You got to sign these, man. I said, sign them? They said, yeah, you got to autograph the book, man. It's like history. I said, okay. So I started signing them. First book signing in my life, right? Now, a woman, a grown-up, I did not know, came and tapped me on the shoulder. I said, yes. And she said, excuse me, are you somebody? I was like, madam, yes, I am. I was sunk. I thought, this is like going to heaven. Are you kidding? And she bought one. I signed it. You can't stop from there. It's almost time for me to do the reading, but I just wanted to tell you just one little example of family border story. Might give you a sense of either how alien the border is or how similar it is to your experience. I don't know. I think they both are true. But one of the reasons I became a story writer and a poet, I think, is because of the incredible depth of life that I saw around me. And one of the things that broke my heart, and it breaks my heart still, and no matter what group I'm speaking to, because my job is speaking to thousands of people a year. That's what I do now. You know, I've been on the road since 2004, which is really cool. I was telling the students this morning, when I was a kid, of course, I wanted to be a rock star, you know, learn guitar and go on tour. And I never learned guitar, but I'm on tour, so it's kind of nice. But I meet people, and all of us are watching our stories disappear. All of us are watching our elders die or become old or be silent. And it really hurt me to watch these stories go away. And I realized that, you know, sometimes our family keeps telling us stuff or showing us stuff and we don't pay attention, and then they're gone. And then you ask yourself for the rest of your life, what was the detail? What were they trying to tell me? And that got me early on. And one of the things that was interesting to me is in those days, you know, coming into Southern California from Mexico, my family had a really hard time. And I did not know that people thought lesser of us. I did not know people, you know, called us names. And I was really shocked when I got called my first racial names. I thought, what am I? I'm a what? Are you kidding? And it felt like such a weird betrayal because I'd come to the U.S. and, you know, we'd left the barrio. At 5th grade, I'd gone to a nice white working class suburb, and I was like, this is awesome. This is the best place I've ever been. I joined the Boy Scouts. I was in the Bat Patrol of Troop 260. Woo! You know, hiking. My father hated it. My father thought that wasn't macho. What kind of uniform is that? What are you, a neckerchief? What are you, a girl? He just didn't get it, you know. But I was in with my buddies, and we were in 5th grade, and we were in the bathroom, my Bat Patrol buds and me. And one of the guys says, they used to call me Unreal because they couldn't say Urrea. Unreal's a pretty good name for a writer, by the way. And he said, hey, Unreal. I said, yeah. He said, you know what you are? I said, no, what am I? He said, you're a greaser and a wetback. And I was like, I'm a what? So you're a greaser, wetback. And all my friends started laughing at me. Greaser, greaser, and they all walked out. And I remember standing in the bathroom thinking, what is that? What is that? And, you know, your kid's mind starts processing that stuff literally. And I was like, wait, I've got grease on my back? I've got a back wet with grease and I can't see it? Only these guys can see my grease? It was humiliating. And then I started realizing all these names, you know. We were Spicks and Beaners and Pepper Bellies. The one they did well in California, which I don't hear other places, they used to call us taco benders, right? Because the taco has a bend in it. Quite creative on their part, taco bender. So my cousin Jaime came from Mexico every summer, and you would love this guy to this day. He was one of those those guys you meet that are just magic. He was the world's best basketball player, the world's best watercolor painter, you know, the world's best lover of women. And he was a folk singer, but he didn't know English, so he was a Beatles fanatic, and he would learn Beatles songs phonetically. And we'd get out the guitar, and he'd start singing me these songs. Hey, bungalow bill, guarichuquillo, bungalow bill. And he'd say, ¿Qué es un bungalow bill, eh? And I'd say, it's the name of this guy. ¿Qué es un bungalow? It's like a little building. I was trying to decode these. So we're walking down the street one day, and he had this obsession. When he came from Mexico, he wanted American food and made me take him to Taco Bell. I'm serious. So he'd say, Oye, Luis, let's get American food. I'd say, no, not Taco Bell. Yeah, Taco Bell. So off we'd go walking down the street. And a guy drove by us. And I mean, you know, he's classic Mexican. Brown, black hair. Here's me, Irish-looking boy, Bubba boy. And we're walking down the street, and this guy pulled up and yelled, hey, taco bender, to Jaime. And like this, he turned around and he said, what do you want, cheeseburger? To me, it's beautiful. You know, it's beautiful, stories and language and identity. So in my family, there was a saint, and her name was Teresita, the Saint of Cabora. And I did 2 books about her. the hummingbird's daughter and the Queen of America. I spent 26 years researching her life. At the 10-year mark, I started studying with medicine people and shamans. She was a Yaqui healer, a Yaqui hechicera, which means, medicine woman. And she was an herbalist and a midwife. And she was the illegitimate daughter of my great uncle Tomás Urrea. Now, Tomás Urrea was, all you genealogists help me out on this, but he was the first cousin of my great-grandfather Seferino. And he was orphaned, so he was taken in by my great-great-grandfather, and they were raised as brothers, Tomás and Seferino. And so Tomás became a young, very handsome hacienda owner. And for many years, for the last about 7 years, 6 of those last 7 years, it was slated to be a film with Antonio Banderas as Tomás. I know, right? Except to my kids who are like, oh, isn't that Puss in Boots and Shrek? Isn't that dude like the Flonase bee now, So, like many movie deals, it fell through, but that gives you an idea of what he was like. He was very dashing and very handsome. And this girl was studying to be a midwife and an herbalist with a medicine woman. She was of the Yaqui Mayo-Tehueco tribes, which all share a language in Sinaloa and Sonora. And she had a near-death experience in her teens, and she was actually pronounced dead. And she awoke during her wake in front of everybody. And when she woke up, if you're up on your saints, you'll recognize this, she began to exude the scent of roses. And so, and then all hell broke loose. She became this incredible figure, pre-revolutionary figure, and she fomented an Indian war. Her followers were massacred at the same time. Wounded Knee was massacred up here, same kind of movement. She was sort of a female Wovoka, if you know those kind of things, except she did heal and was observed hundreds and hundreds of times. It's just buried in the archives. So I spent many years rescuing her story. Now, halfway through her life, she was put out of Mexico and sent to the U.S., which is Queen of America. And I like to say that in the first book, she was an indigenous medicine woman. In the second book, she was Lady Gaga. Because she got to the U.S. and suddenly found herself famous and had paparazzi and fans and posters and tours and electric lights and automobiles and this insane world she was in. She ended up living on East 28th Street in New York City. She was a Gibson girl, won the Mrs. New York City competition. So you start only in America, right? You start in a little Mexican Indian village, barefoot and starving, and you end up a high society lady in Manhattan. I don't know, only here. So the first book, it's Lonesome Dove with Miracles, and the second book is Ragtime with Miracles. And I thought I would give you just a brief passage from Queen of America so you could hear how I write if you don't know, and meet her and her dad, Tomás. In honor of y'all and this event, I'm going to do it from memory and not read it. So that's kind of value added, maybe. When they got to the United States, she actually fell in love. Now, I know a lot of you are dads like me, and a lot of you are dads of teenage girls like me. My daughter's over there writhing right now. So there comes a point in life where, the teenage girl and the dad sometimes butt heads, and that happened to the dad and Teresita. Tomás and Teresita had a little bit of a separation, and she fell in love. He did not approve of the boyfriend. He fought with her about the boyfriend until all the women on his ranch became angry with him and gave him the silent treatment, and he hated the silent treatment. He couldn't stand it. We men can't take it. It's your greatest weapon you use on us when you won't talk. We can't stand it, and he couldn't stand it. So he decided that the way he would get back into everybody's good graces was to throw her a big dance, Mexican style in the United States, a big hacienda dance with music, barbecue, and he was going to pull a stratagem to impress everybody, and that's the scene. Her boyfriend is named Guadalupe, and she has a little sister named Anita, okay? And she was known as the Saint of Cabora, Teresita. The Saint of Cabora walked up to the dance floor arm in arm with her boyfriend, Guadalupe. He was tall, dark, very grim and thin. Following behind was her chubby little sister, Anita, and they came walking across the ranch to the outside dance floor. It was lit with paper lanterns hanging from cross ropes over the dancers' heads. Papel picado banners were blowing in the breezes. On one side, there was a cow being barbecued. On the other side, there was a goat being barbecued. Women were selling tamales, meat tamales, and sweet tamales with raisins and cinnamon and honey. There was a band from far Esquinapa playing ridiculous cumbia music in a corner. There was a trumpeter, a violinist, a bajo sexto, and a guitar player. And as they played, each man went up and down like the pistons of some steam machine made out of meat. They were playing a song called Tiburón, Tiburón, which was a song about a shark in the Sea of Cortez, looking for a human being to eat. It was swimming up and down the shore, but it was frustrated because all of the swimmers were on shore at a party and they were dancing. And after a while, watching the humans dance, the shark gave up, jumped out of the water, and joined them in the dance. Teresita looked around the party and she said to him, Guadalupe, look at this, it fills my heart. And Guadalupe, muy macho, said, I have no heart. She said, oh, you're so manly. She said, I will teach you how to speak to a woman one day. And he said, how do I speak to a woman? You say, Teresita, this beauty of this evening has filled my soul so completely I barely have room for a heart. I don't have a soul. She said, I will keep working on you. Anita said, Lupe, let's dance. Guadalupe said, no, I don't dance. Lupe, let's dance. Dance with me. I don't dance. Please, 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 please. Dance with me. Dance with me. Dance with me. All right, I'll take you to dance. Guadalupe took her out onto the dance floor. Teresita watched them. The tall, slender man, the little chubby girl, they looked like the numeral 10 out there. Anita stood on his cowboy boots, and he began to dance around in circles with her standing on his boots, and she was laughing and squealing. Teresita was so happy to watch it. Suddenly, here came Tomás Urrea, riding up out of the darkness on his greatest black stallion. Tomás had named the stallion after himself, Caballito Urrea. In fact, he named all of the livestock after himself. He had a bull, Toro Urrea. The cows were Las Vacas Urrea. He had a green parrot in a cage named Periquito Urrea. And the parrot spent all day long saying its own name over and over. Periquito, 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 Urrea! Periquito, 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 Urrea! Tomás rode the black stallion on a black saddle, dressed completely in black. He wore shiny black boots with gold and silver spurs. The rowels jangled like little church bells. He wore skin-tight black pants with silver conchos sewed up the sides. Well, they were skin-tight except for the waist that had a little notch cut by the ladies to make room for his gut. He had a pistol belt with 2 American 6 guns mounted backwards, butt out, so he could cross-draw in case he needed to kill anybody. He wore a white shirt with a frill down the front and a waist-long, tight black jacket with a red rose at each breast, red filigree at the cuffs, and on the back, in shiny black satin thread, a scorpion. On his head, he wore a huge Mexican sombrero, black, the edges of the brim worked in silver thread. On the crown, 2 silver horseshoes for luck. His great mustache waxed. And he came forth. The band kept playing. The dancers stopped to watch him approach. And he tapped the horse on the side, and it went sideways in rhythm to the music, and then it went back in rhythm to the music, then it backed up and went forward, and the people said, ay, el patrón is so powerful, even his horses can dance. He pulled the horse and turned it sideways to the crowd and looked at them. He kicked his leg over the pommel and slid down and landed. Everyone applauded. He bowed. He took his great hat off, and he spied a little 7-year-old boy, and he dropped the hat on the boy's head. It covered his face to his chin, and Tomas said, "It is good to be king, my friend." He walked to the center of the dance floor. He didn't even look at anybody. He just put his hand out and snapped his fingers, and a lariat appeared as if by magic in his hand. He looked at everybody and dropped the end of it. It fell to the ground. There was a loop at the end. And he began to move his wrist. He began to move his wrist faster and faster, started to squirm like a snake, formed that perfect circle, and then rose about an inch off the ground. He smiled at everybody. Everybody watched the rope. He brought his hand up higher, and the rope rose just a little more. He brought it over his head, and he stepped into the middle of the circle and spun it around himself. And then he made it rise up his body and down his body. Up his body and down his body. People politely clapped. It was nice. He stepped back out, and he went like this, and it formed an oval beside him, a perfect oval through which anything in the universe could step if he so chose. And he stood there looking at everybody, and he looked out through the loop of the lariat, and he saw a little group of young women sitting by the band, and he smiled, and he went toward them. The loop shot across the dance floor to lasso them. They squealed, kicked over their chairs, and ran. Everyone laughed. "Ay, que patron!" Very nice. And he brought it back to himself and stood there. This is when a marvelous thing happened. He threw his hand over his head, and the loop went up, and the rope formed a tornado of hemp above his head, spinning. He did not look at it, however. He stood like this. He stood as if bored, looking at the ground, because he was macho. And a macho man has already done everything. He's done it so well, it bores him. So he stood like this. People loved it. People clapped. He looked up and he looked across the dance floor. His daughter, Teresita, the saint of Cabora, was in the middle of the dance floor alone, watching her father, watching the rope. Without warning, he dropped the lariat and roped her, cinched it tight around her arms. Everyone laughed. She pulled away from him. He pulled her toward him. She pulled back away. He pulled her a little more toward him. She finally broke with a laugh, ran across the dance floor, and jumped into his arms. Everybody applauded. Everyone was happy. He spun her in a circle, her skirts looking like a huge flower as she flew around him in the air, and he leaned down to her ear and said, "Stay away from that bastard." He took the ropes off her and let her go. The crowd burst into great huzzas and applause. And as he tried to walk to his horse to make his exit, someone stopped him and handed him a tequila. "Jefe, tequila!" He said, "Viva Arizona!" He drank it and threw it, and it broke. He kept walking, and another stopped him and gave him a beer. And he said, "God bless America!" He drank it, and he threw it, and it shattered. He kept walking toward his horse, and a third one stopped and gave him a glass of vino. And he said, "Viva Mexico!" And he drank it, and he dropped the glass. He was a little bit drunk by then. He got to the horse and was just about to mount. Everyone was silent, staring at him. And he turned around and he looked at them. And he raised his arms to them. And he said, "How did you like that, cabrones?" And that's it. Thank you. I've gone over by 4 minutes. So if you have questions, hit me. But please come to the microphones because we're being recorded. And you can be on the record with me. Anybody have any questions? Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, come on up. Thanks, sir.
I got to say, I read In the Beautiful North, and I just love the characters. I never
Thank you.
found such fabulously interesting characters.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how the larger media reports on the life at the border compared to the reality. I saw an article in the New York Times. They called it Nopales instead of Nogales.
Yeah,
Can you
right.
offer us a little insight on that?
You know, it's been interesting for me because I think sometimes you're sold a bill of goods. For example, I think a lot of the coverage is inflammation, but not information. And when I did Devil's Highway, it's 10-year anniversary now, and we just are releasing the new revised edition of it. And I tried to warn back then that immigration's not going to be your problem. It's going to be an armed insurgent terrorist war fueled by drugs, which has happened. What I didn't expect is that the narcos would take over immigration and human smuggling as well, so that the toll of suffering is mind-shredding. But, we're at zero net immigration and passages of negative number immigration, which is really fascinating, but the deaths don't drop. The deaths stay high. So it's a very deadly passage, but one thing, for example, because I could go all night, but I'll just give you an example. When I was studying with the Border Patrol and doing this investigation for that book, Devil's Highway, there were 32 agents at the station I was working out of, and there are now over 300 agents. People talk about militarizing the border. They have no idea how militarized it is now. Santa Teresa Station near El Paso, 30 years, 30 agents. They have about, I think, 350 now. What's interesting about Welton Station that I did my book out of is that the government had to tear the station down and rebuild it to fit all the agents, but they didn't have people really filling the pens, just agents. So that's interesting. That's interesting. I think there's a lot of stuff about it that we don't know, and I will throw out, because I know other people are waiting. I am very suspicious of people who write about the border who come down and spend a day or two and then come back and write a definitive text. It bothers me. And we from that region call it my day at the zoo reporting, because they go and look at funny people doing funny stuff and come back and write a book. And I think it takes a lot more. And I was really gratified to find out that the Border Patrol for a while was teaching my books at the academy. Not, they thought I was a brain-damaged liberal, pretty much, and I may be, but they were kind about it. They were like, "You'll get over it. You'll be all right." But the reason they did is because the old-timers, the agents who've been there 10 years or more, were really concerned that this big influx of new enthusiasm would make people not understand the milieu, which I think's cool. It's really thoughtful, and so. It's a very complex world, and I will say that, some of it has just been a sad boondoggle, in my opinion. The fence is crazy. If you go down and look at the fence, you'll see 1 mile of fence, 6 miles of open range, and a mile of fence. And you think, oh gosh, I hope nobody walks around the edge of that fence, because there's nothing there. It's weird, and it's cost us $6 billion, as well as having cut off parts of the United States and given them back to Mexico. If you're a student of history and you know about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, where, Santa Anna sold Mexico to us and pocketed all the money, he's dancing in his grave. He got a Texas golf course because they had to put the fence north of the golf course. They gave a golf course back to Mexico. What? Are you kidding me? I'd like to see what the golfers thought about that. So it's very complex, and I would say that we have an impression of horror and nightmare, which is true, but there's also, fraternity and oddly enough, love there. And, y'all are right next to a much bigger border and a much more porous border. It just hasn't been a great outpouring of Canadians running down here yet, but, just wait. One of these days. I have a friend who's an agent in Detroit, and I really love the guy. Talk to him, but I want to do a piece about Motor City Migra. What do the Border Patrol agents in Detroit do? That's interesting. And he said, well, where would you do it for? And I said, well, I thought maybe we could sell it to Playboy. And he was quiet. And he said, well, a man has to make sacrifices. So I just think it's really, an ongoing story, and always changing, yet always the same, which is a really mysterious thing for me. But the people are definitely suffering, and you'd be astounded if you could talk to some of those immigrants and find out why they came. Because most of the ones I know came not to die, which is hard, in spite of what people hear. But hit me, I ain't shy.
¿Dónde obtiene usted su inspiración para sus novelas?
Ay, es que soy genio. He said, where do I get my inspiration from to write novels? I said, I'm a genius.
Sí, tú eres muy inteligente.
Ay, I don't know. You know, it just it comes to you, or you get certain ideas. I mean, you know, Queen and Hummingbird, I had to tell my family history, so that was easy.
Yeah.
You know, it just depends on the story. I'm lucky to have been published in all the genres, so sometimes something shows up and it tells you what it is. If it's a haiku, you know it's not an epic novel. That's the way it is, you know,
Yeah.
pondering, the gentle hummingbird. You think, I'm not going to write a 600-pager about that.
Yeah.
So things tell you, and then a lot of times, particularly in nonfiction, it's an assignment. You know, I write for Orion magazine a lot.
Wow.
And my editor just wrote me and said I owe her a column. I was like, oh, are you kidding?
Yeah.
But fortunately, just got this week, in fact, got back from Alaska, so I have awesome Orion material to write about. You know.
Nice.
So it just
Awesome.
depends on the material. And, you know, writing is prayer. I can say that here, right? This
Yeah.
is the right place to talk about this. But writing for me is prayer, and so it's more a kind of a calling and call and response to me with God, I guess.
Yeah.
Even the naughty bits, because you're trying to tell the truth as you see it about our
Yeah.
human journey.
Kind of like young
and
Lee,
so
yeah.
it's kind of my church, you know.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a writer myself, so I totally know how you feel. It's
What do you
like,
write?
It's like I'm working on a novel right now called Honor and Glory.
That's my man right there. Good.
Yeah, it's a historical novel about war and why we should avoid it at all costs, and like what happens with our veterans when we're out at war, and the effects
Awesome.
that happens when they come back home.
Cool.
So yeah,
Good luck, man.
yeah. Gracias.
Just keep at it, brother. There are many forces that will tell you to stop. Do not stop. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have two questions for
Okay.
you. First, how did you know that you could write, or that like you had something that people would actually read?
Oh, man. Okay.
And the second question is, how did you know when the work that you were constructing, whether it be a novel or a creative nonfiction piece, was done or finished, and you knew that you were just done with it?
Oh, my. First, how did I know it was worth reading? You never know it's worth reading, but I found out in high school that girls like love poems. So I wrote a lot of love poems, and somehow I was naive enough to think if I wrote the perfect love poem to my girlfriend Colette, I would become huge like Led Zeppelin and get a private jet. It doesn't work that way, I found out. But I thought, you know, it was a form of communication that I'd never had before. And I was a big letter writer, so I knew I was really good at letter writing, and then I was really bad at poetry, but nobody knew, because we were kids. That's how I found out. And then I started writing song lyrics for my musician friends, and I was a drama major, so I started writing shows. It just became the thing I did. And I almost didn't, I was too naive or arrogant, I don't know which, to imagine that I would fall on my face. And if people mocked me, I was just like, you simply don't understand. You know? How do you know it's done? I don't know. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes it just grinds to a halt, and you say, I better end it somehow because there's no more coming. Sometimes the characters tell you. They know when they're done. I hate to say it. I don't want to be too mystical, but sometimes they're like, that's it. See ya. Like, no, come back. Wait. They're done. And you realize the story is complete, and you have to finish it. If you're doing a nonfiction piece, often it's a set, you know, it's a set story, or it's a set piece of reporting that you tell. So once you get it out and make sense of it, it depends on the piece.
Thanks.
Thank you. Should I go back here? Hi. Hey.
You can go back over there. We can do two and.
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
Hi.
This one might be a long one, though.
Okay, I'm ready.
Well, you were talking a lot about different stories from your childhood, and I was wondering if there's one or maybe like a sequence of stories from your childhood. And I'm hooked now, and I just want to hear you tell more stories.
Oh.
So I was wondering if there's something that you could share for us, maybe succinctly, I don't know. but I wanted to hear something.
Me succinct? Are you kidding? No, I can tell you a story. I can tell you a story. You know,
Thank you.
I have 1 minute, and this is only going to take about 20, so we're good. We're good. I'll tell you the story that makes me laugh so hard. How about that? And this is also a reason that I kind of write, and that is Guadalupe Murray, my grandma. Now, I'll tell you one secret. You were asking about, border reporting represent. People have a wrong impression, I think, of us. I cannot stand the Mexican sleeping under a cactus thing. I have never known one. They're all insane for money and business, and let's make a deal. We'll go rebuild New Orleans. Let's do that. Yeah. So my grandmother, all the grandmothers that I ever knew had negocios. They had businesses, and they would come up with really wacky stuff like spray paint a Coca-Cola bottle gold and stick wings on it and sell it for an angel at Christmas. Oh, that's good, comadre. That's good, Or they'd make tamales, or they make tortillas. Everybody was doing business all the time. And I told you my family's from this town, Rosario. Rosario is one of these little magical towns. It is 100 years of solitude, top to bottom. And people from that town love it so much, they form clubs. They form Rosario clubs, El Club Rosarense. You probably have enough Mexicans around here now that you'll find a Club Rosarense somewhere in Michigan. And people from Rosario, they don't do anything. They play mahjong. Anybody play mahjong? They love mahjong. So you go to Club Rosarense, and they're in there moving their mahjong tiles around and smoking and drinking instant coffee. They think instant coffee, Folgers instant coffee. That's like Star Trek to them. Oh, instant. So they're doing this, and periodically somebody will stop and say, "Oh yeah, do you remember the iguanas?" And they'll say, "Ay, iguanas." I'll go back to play, I say, "Do you remember how it would rain?" And somebody say, "It rained every day starting at June 6th. That's right. And they go back and play. They don't ever say anything or do anything. Just ideas. Mangos. I see. Back to mahjong. So my grandma went to San Diego's Rosarense Club, and she was looking around at these people, and my grandma was trying to think of a business, right? And she realized that there was one thing missing, and that was none of these people had parrots. That in Sinaloa, everybody had Perejito Urrea. Perejito, Perejito, Perejito Urrea. One of those. And so she figured out that she could sell parrots to the Mexicans in San Diego, which was illegal. So this is the birth of my grandma's gangsta life, right? My grandma became a smuggler, and this is how she did it. There's a fruit market in Tijuana where you can buy parrots, and they're really, back then, were really cheap. Like a couple of bucks, you buy a parrot. So my grandmother gets this incredible idea that she's going to smuggle parrots. So they took me, I must have been 7, maybe 8. I was a little dude anyway, maybe 9, I don't know. But they take me to the fruit market, and she buys a parrot. That's a cute little parrot. And she's got him, and she takes out a little bottle with tequila. And she takes an eyedropper, and she gives him a bunch of tequila, like 3-4 drops of tequila, and the bird's like, whoa. And it goes to sleep, right? Grandma takes a piece of newspaper and wraps him up like a little tamal, tight. And then there's no discreet way to tell you this. She stuffs him down her cleavage. And she's got. So then we go to the border. Now, we're in the car. I'm in the back seat. My dad's driving. My grandma's in the front. Birds in heaven. And back in those days, the border was not the border you see now. It was a much more rustic, funky, not friendly necessarily, but not what it is now. And when you were crossing to the United States, there were a couple of wooden shacks, and there were customs guys. It's got a bluish uniform. And they would just stand there. And as a little kid, I just remember all you'd see was a belly and a chest, maybe a chin, through the window. And the guy would be looking this way. You'd pull up, and he'd be looking at the next car's license. And you'd see him turn, and he'd say to my dad, "Hey, amigo, papeles?" My dad would pull it out, "Green card." And he'd bend over to me, "What about you, buddy?" I'd say, "I'm a U.S. citizen." "Oh, okay." And they let us go. So that day we pull up, knowing that it's illegal. I'm in the back thinking we're going to go to jail. The guy turns to my dad and say, "Amigo, papeles?" My dad says, "Green card." Very good. I see him bend over, look at my grandmother. "Ma'am." She says, "Pasaporte." How about you, buddy? U.S. citizen. Okay, so he went to turn to the next car, which when the parrot wakes up. He turns like this, and I see his, and all of a sudden you hear, like this. And the guy's frozen, and then, like this, and he turns back to the car, and he's just standing there, clearly looking at my father. Now, my mom and my grandma and my dad are acting like, what? And I was in the back just thinking, I'm going to be killed or put in prison or something. So I see the guy bend over and look in. Now, by now, the parrot's starting to stir. So and I'm just looking from the angle behind my dad. I'm watching her chest moving. And I throw this out as shorthand. You've seen Alien. Everybody seen Alien? You remember the chest burster and Alien? Okay, so Grandma is sitting there like nothing happened, and suddenly, comes out of her bust, peeling out of the newspaper, just looking around, screaming, right? And this U.S. agent is just like this. And all he did was he just said, "Get out of here now." And he just let us go. I was lucky enough to witness that, though I didn't feel lucky at the time. I didn't even know it was funny till the first time I told an audience, and they started losing their minds. I was like, what are you laughing at, man? So, right? How can you not write if you've seen that stuff? Oh, thank you. Thank you. My grandmother thanks you. Maybe, do we have time for one more? One more?
Okay. I feel like, do you want to ask a question? Because if it's one more. Okay. I was just going to ask you about your relief work in Tijuana.
Yes.
I know that's kind of a different note than we were on, but if you just want to expand on that, that would be good.
Sure. Wow, way to end on a downer. Okay, I got the audience up so high, now I'm going to, no, I'm kidding. I was the first one to go to college, and my dad died. I was telling the students today. He'd gone to Mexico to get my graduation money because he'd never had a kid in college, and he was killed by Mexican cops. They caught him, and they made me buy his corpse. I spent the last money my mom and I had to buy his body. And, we were on the quarter system, so it was the middle quarter, and I was in finals. You can imagine how that went. So I graduated, thanks to Ursula Le Guin, I think. But I didn't know what to do with myself, and I didn't want to go to grad school. And we didn't have that concept of that year off, whatever they call it, that people take now. I just didn't want to go to school anymore. And I didn't know what to do, so you heard I was a cartoonist. I did all kinds of stuff. I was a movie extra a little bit. And friends of mine were really involved with this Baptist preacher, Pastor Vaughn, who was super famous in Southern California in those days. He was actually a German-American baron, Erhard George von Trutschler III. So he went by Pastor Vaughn, and he had spent much of his adult life helping the poor in Mexico. He's still there. You Facebookers, he's on Facebook, Pastor Vaughn, V-O-N. He's 86 years old, and he's planning to die in Mexico serving the poor. The guy's my hero. I love him. But, they said, why don't you go with Vaughn? And I remember thinking, there's no way. First of all, Baptist, forget about it. I'm a movie extra, yo. I got long blonde hair, man, and a suntan. I'm not going. And I also thought, I'm from Tijuana. I'm the soul of Tijuana, man, But I went, and Pastor Vaughn took me to an orphanage, weirdly enough, about 6 blocks from my grandma's house where I grew up. And I thought, holy smokes, really? I didn't know there was an orphanage here. And I met a little girl there that looked just like me. And I thought there's probably one of my uncles was over there. She was my cousin of some sort. And her name was America. So you're a young writer, and you meet America abandoned in Tijuana. You're thinking, this is rich. I don't know what to do with that. And Vaughn took me to an all-boys orphanage, which I'd never seen the likes of before. It was like a prison. It was really scary to me. And on the way home, he said, you're really good with that Spanish. I said, yeah, I'm from the neighborhood. No, I said, yep, I'm from the neighborhood. And he said, what are you doing on Thursday? And I said, why? And he said, well, we're going to the Tijuana garbage dump. You want to see that? You've never seen garbage pickers, have you? And I said, actually, no, I really haven't. And he took me to this dump, and it's not only was a garbage dump full of garbage pickers, but it was the site where they dump all of the dead animals in this Tijuana area and burn them. So on Thursdays, they'd light them on fire, and you'd get there, and there'd be these towers of burning skeletons everywhere. It was like Dante. And the other thing interesting is it had the best view of San Diego. You could see all the way to downtown San Diego from there. And those people ate run-over dogs to stay alive, 10 minutes from downtown. So Vaughn, in his wisdom, gave me my first job, which was to wash the feet of garbage pickers. My first day, I washed 300 feet, and it broke my heart. And then he said, what are you doing Saturday? I said, why? And he said, well, we're building houses. You never built a house for anybody, did you? I said, no. He said, you should check it out. So I went on Saturday, and we built houses. And then he said, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, why? And he said, well, I have to preach. So what? I need a translator. I said, Vaughn, if I get in a pulpit, we'll both be hit by lightning. And he said, I would dance with the devil himself if it saved some children. I thought, ooh, I'm the devil? That's cool. That's kind of rock and roll. So I went and translated, and that was it. I was his man, and we were together for years doing it. And, it changed everything for me. I like to tell writing students that for me it's about a literature of witness, and that happened there. I realized that I still wished I was Jim Morrison or Stephen King because I was poor and wanted to be rich, but I needed to tell their story. And that was when my obsession with sort of, trying to serve came from, is trying to tell their story. So,
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.